Video 2 for this week. In our last video, we talked about buffalo and treaties and massacres and sports shoes. So in this one, we're going to talk about everything else from the chapter. So let's see, we'll kick off here with the boomtown. So here is the life of a boomtown. Somebody discovers gold like Cripple Creek, Colorado. Somebody discovers silver like Virginia City, Nevada. Somebody stumbles across a slick patch of oil on the ground like Guthrie, Oklahoma. And then they open their big mouths. And then thousands of people rush in and they form a quick little town. Sometimes it's just tents. And then people try to grab all the resources they can. Now, when you have a lot of people in one little area, then you have your entrepreneurs out there, right? And so the very first people to show up are the saloon owners and the prostitutes. So why do you need the saloons? Well, the saloons, these guys, they've got all the gold and silver nuggets or whatever, and what are they going to spend it on? And they're not spending it on gasoline for their cars. They're not spending it on internet, cell phone plans. They're not spending it on ESPN packages. What are they spending it on? Oh, they're spending it on whiskey, and then the prostitutes spending money. And so entrepreneurs out there, right? If the boomtown hangs on for longer than a season or 2 seasons, then more people are going to show up. You start having one-room schools, and you have the general store who shows up, who starts to sell more pickaxes and shovels and whatever. Well, I was about to say video games. I don't know what's coming to my head. And then you have a sheriff who shows up and says, "All right, this lawless county, and we're going to take, and we're going to." All right, there you go. If everything kind of peters out and all the gold's gone, all the coins gone, whatever it is, then if it all kind of goes away, then you get what's called a ghost town. And so you just have what was left in the first season or first 2 seasons, and people just leave because there's no reason to be there anymore. And do we have ghost towns, or do we have ghost towns in the Southwest? So we've got a lot of them. What else is on the slide? Oh, yeah. So women are going to show that's very misogynistic, women. Women are going to show up, and they are going to be treated. I don't know about treated. They're going to be. Some people are going to recognize them as equals. They're going to be out there with pickaxes and the shovels. They're going to be out there selling wares. They're going to be out there doing stuff just like the men. And so, why is this important? Well, because ultimately, these western states, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, are going to be the first ones to allow women to vote. Wyoming being the first one in 1866. Now, we're not talking about vote for president. We're talking about individual state votes, because you can't vote for president. Well, not until 1920 if you're female. All right, cattle drives. When I went in and taught in Japan, we were talking about. They'd ask me, where are you from? And I would say Oklahoma. And they'd say, well, where's Oklahoma? And I'd say, well, we're just north of Texas. And people would be like, oh, Texas. And I know you're sitting there thinking, why don't people from Japan know where Oklahoma is? Well, how many states in Japan can you name, right? So, but they knew Texas. And so I said, we're north of Texas. And then occasionally you get the Japanese person who'd say, oh, cowboys, the Texas Cowboys. Right, because, cowboys and the cattle drives and all that kind of stuff. That was only about 20 years of the United States history. It only lasted from 1866 to really the 1880s, and then it died off for several reasons. We'll get to that in a second. So, what's the big deal about a cattle drive? You got 2,000 head of cattle in Texas, and you want to get them to New York City. Well, how do you do that? You can't put them on an airplane. You can't put them in the car. Can't put them on the big truck yet, because we don't have big trucks yet. You got to put them on the train. Here's the problem. Trains don't go to Texas. The closest train goes through Kansas. So you got to get from Texas to Kansas. And to get from Texas to Kansas, you got to get them to walk. And so you get 2,000 cattle together and you drive them north across Oklahoma. We had a couple of big trails. We had the Great Western Trail. We had the Jesse Chisholm Trail. The Jesse Chisholm Trail, in fact, is going to come up north, up through El Reno and Yukon, and a little bit on that side of Mustang. So we're like right on the edge of the trails, because the trail wasn't just like 100 yards wide. These were 5, 10, 15 mile, 20 mile wide trails, because if you have 2,000 head of cattle walking in a single file line, they're going to eat all that grass, and it's going to be a big bare spot. So they spread the cattle out. Regardless, 2,000 cattle, you got 12 cowboys. That's all you need, 12 cowboys. You got the trail boss, who's in charge. You got the cook, who's the number 2 guy, because he's the cook. And then you got 10 other cowboys. One of those cowboys is in charge of all the extra horses, and then everybody else is in charge of keeping the herd together. And so we know that from Texas to Kansas, depending on where you are in Texas, depending on where you're going in Kansas, 25 to 100 days between point A and point B. You travel 10, 15 miles a day. I know, and you're sitting there thinking, that's it, just 10 miles a day? Well, but the cattle are eating on the way. And why are they eating on the way? Because if they eat on the way, then they're fatter when they get there, right? Or at least they maintain their weight. And then you sell them by the pound. Hey, there you go. Cowboy life, man, that's tough. Whew, it's tough. And they got paid, I don't know if you want to say they got paid well, right? It says here that the cowboy, the non-trail boss and the non-cook, the regular cowboy got paid about $30 a month. And so I looked that up, and if we use inflation today, in the year 2021, in the year 2021, $30 was about $600 a month. And now you're sitting there going, oh, $600 a month, that's not, that's not actually that much. Well, it is if you consider that you're not paying for rent, and you're not paying for food, you're not paying for, internet. So $600 a month that goes basically right into your pocket. That's not bad. I mean, the cook gets paid double that because, he's the cook, and then the trail boss gets paid double that because he's the boss. And it's good to be the king. Dodge City, Abilene, Denver, they were all trail ends, and so you get the cattle up to that point, and then put them on the train and go. And ask yourself now, why Texas cattle? Well, back during this time, there was the evil Texas tick that carried Texas fever, and it tended to kill off a lot of cattle, except the longhorn cattle were immune to the Texas fever. So when all the other cattle died off and the longhorn were standing out there all by themselves, people were like, we're going to go with the longhorns. Texas longhorns. Cowboys lasted 20 years. The great romantic life of the cowboy. Capital R, not lowercase r. Capital R, romantic life of the cowboy. It went away. And why? Well, because the railroads eventually are going to expand down into Texas. Barbed wire. The ranchers, the sheep ranchers in North Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas are going to start walling off their acreages with barbed wire. And Texas Longhorn don't like barbed wire. Nobody really likes barbed wire. How many times can I say barbed wire in like 10 seconds? Barbed wire, barbed wire, barbed wire. That's hard to say. And refrigeration. Why would refrigeration stop the cowboys? Oh, right, because if you slaughter the cow in Texas and you put the cow meat that's a weird thing to say. You put the cow meat in a refrigerator and then haul the refrigerator to New York City. There you go. If you ever get a chance to see City Slickers, that's a great movie about cattle drives. It's a comedy with Billy Crystal. Anyway. The good guys and the bad guys. The guys wearing the white hats and the guys wearing the black hats. Oh man, it just dawned on me. Anyway, so we've got, talking about the good guys, the sheriffs, the lawmen. So we've got Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok and Doc Holliday, and then the hanging judge, Isaac Parker. So there's Isaac Parker, the hanging judge. Ask yourself, why would they call him the hanging judge? You probably got that. And then here's Wild Bill Hickok. Wild Bill was a sheriff, and he a lawman, a deputy. He was killed up in Wyoming during a poker game, and of course one of the stories that comes out of that was that the cards that he had in his hand when he died were black aces over eights, and so if you get the hand when you're playing poker, you have aces over eights, then that's called the dead man's hand. Things that you didn't know, and now you do. All right, and then let's see over here we've got Billy the Kid. He actually kind of looks like one of my middle school kids from a long time ago. Anyway, but Billy the Kid. And then this guy, Elmer McCurdy. We're talking about the bad guys. The Doolin gang, the Dalton gang, Billy the Kid, Elmer McCurdy. Of course, I could list just a ton of these guys. But Elmer McCurdy, oh, wow. If you have a chance to go Wikipedia this guy, oh, he's fun. He's a terrible outlaw, by the way, just terrible. He got captured and he was killed. And, okay, here's the 30-second story. Ready? 30 seconds. He was captured and he killed, and when they laid him out and they put the formaldehyde and arsenic in his body to keep him preserved, then he was put in a closet because things happened, and then he was forgotten in the closet. And then the new guy came in for the building, didn't realize there was a dead guy in the closet, and the closet stayed like that. And then a Hollywood company came through a couple years later, and they found this dead guy in the back, and they're like, hey, we could use him as a prop. And so they took him to Hollywood, and then he was in the Hollywood storage area for like 40 or 50 years, and people thought he was like a dummy, like he was like a mannequin, because he was very well preserved because of all the formaldehyde and arsenic. Am I at 30 seconds yet? And so then, like the 1970s, he was killed in 1890 something. In the 1970s, they were working on a show called The $6 Million Man, and they were looking for prop dummies, and one of the prop masters goes back into the prop room and finds this dummy, and he's pulling him out of a pile, and he pulls this dummy's arm off, and he's like, wait, I don't think this is a dummy's arm. This is like a real guy's arm. So they traced him back, and anyway, so Elmer McCurdy was buried 77 years after he died. He's buried in, or 80 years, whatever it was. He's buried in Guthrie, Oklahoma. You need to Wikipedia him. He's fun. Okay. The Homestead Act of 1862. Seemed like something else was going on in 1862 in the United States of America. Yes, you're right. That's exactly right. So Abraham Lincoln signed this into... Oh, now you're like, oh, Abraham Lincoln, Civil War Act. I get it. So the Homestead Act, you get 640 acres of free land. And we just talked about this with regard to the Indians, the Dawes Act. This came before the Dawes Act. We're kind of going backwards here. So the Homestead Act, you get 640 acres of free land. Well, that's not quite true. You had to meet certain requirements. You had to be at least 21 years old. You had to be the head of the household, and you had to pay an $18 fee, bureaucracy fee, to get the deed. The rule was that you get your 640 acres, which is pretty good size, right? That's a square mile. It's a square mile. The problem is that, in Boston or in that area where there's trees and hills everywhere, a square mile, you're like, oh my goodness, that feels like forever, a square mile. But out here in the middle of Nebraska, out in the middle of Kansas, a square mile is just like, oh, it's just like right there. I mean, it's just right. I mean, you can see your entire state from just standing there in the middle. So it's not as much as you think. Although, somebody offered me a square mile of land, I guess I'd take it. But you had to live on your square mile, and then you had to improve it. One of the examples of how to improve it, which is written into the Homestead Act, says that if you build a structure 14 by 12, and like I said, you wait 5 years, then you can get the deed, and then that will be your land. So yay! And then some unscrupulous, some dastardly, I could use the word dastardly again, some dastardly people looked at the law and they said, look, it says 14 by 12, but it doesn't have the little tick marks, that like 14 by 12, which means feet. And so some unscrupulous, dastardly people said, well, let's just make 14 inches by 12 inches, little bitty houses, and put them on the land, and then technically we meet the requirement. Good times. The Homestead Act was open to everybody, 1862, and so when people started actually grabbing land, it was open to African Americans. Although we know what really happened, the African Americans, many of them would apply for the land, and then their paperwork would, sometimes get lost, because some people are just buttheads. The last Homestead Act claim, now, all right, check this out, right? The last Homestead Act that was claimed, 640 acres of land, was claimed in 1979, and it was approved in 1988. It was up in Alaska. So some guy who apparently listened to his AP or his U.S. history teacher was going, I wonder if you can still do that. And apparently you could back in 1979 and then get approved in 1988. But if you're still listening, or if you're actually listening and watching this now, yep, sorry, all of the land is now taken, like all of it. 1988, like that wasn't that long ago. Like, your parents were like in middle school or high school, right? I mean, it wasn't. I know to you that seems like that's a long time, but it wasn't really that long ago. Moving on. Okay, a couple of random things kind of thrown in here in the middle. In the period of the 70s and the 90s, we had 4 or 5 states became states. North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Washington were all admitted to states. And then I pulled Utah out by itself. So Utah, right? Utah was admitted in the state in 1896. So, all right, so here's the short version of this. In 1849, the Mormons led by Brigham Young are going to go out to Utah, and they're going to claim a large territory. They want to name it the state of Deseret, and it's like Utah, Nevada, part of Colorado, part of Idaho, part of Montana, part of Washington, part of California, part of Arizona. I mean, it's a huge area. Going to call it the state of Deseret, 1849. In fact, Brigham Young declares himself governor and then sends a representative to Congress in Washington, D.C., and in Washington, D.C., they're like, no, we don't recognize you as a state. So then Brigham Young, he gets his state organized, which Utah Territory. In 1850, the Compromise of 1850, which we've talked about that like 5, 6, 12 videos ago. Part of the compromise was that the territory of Utah and the territory of New Mexico were carved out of the Mexican cession. So the state of Deseret was much, much reduced, and it was officially called the territory of Utah, not of Deseret, but the Mormons kept trying to push for Deseret. Regardless, in a couple years later, the Mormons made a political mistake, and they announced that Utah was a polygamous territory. And so polygamy is having more than one wife. When that got out, I think that was 1856, don't quote me on that, but when that got out, people in the East Coast just lost their minds that we had Americans who were engaging in polygamous marriages. And so when Utah Territory, when Brigham Young said, okay, we'll call ourselves Utah, that's fine, so we would like to become a state. And Congress goes, no, you can't become a state because you're all a bunch of heathens out there. The Church of Latter-day Saints, you can't do that. You can't have polygamous marriages. And so for the next 25, 30 years, Utah would continually ask, I think they asked 5, 6, 7 times to become a state. And each time Congress back in Washington, D.C. said, no, no, no. And then Congress started passing laws against polygamy. You had the Pullman Act that said if you engaged in polygamy, it was considered a crime in some jurisdictions. And then you had the Edmund Act that was passed that said if you are polygamous marriage, then it is a more serious crime, and you can't be a member of the government, you can't run for office, and in fact, if you're a female in a polygamous marriage, you can't even your voting rights will be taken away from you. So pretty crazy stuff. So then Utah said, all right, and this was in the 1880s. They said, all right, we're going to make a rule. Polygamy is going to be a misdemeanor. So the the people of Utah, the Mormons, said polygamy is going to be a misdemeanor, and everybody on the East Coast was like, no, we know what you really, misdemeanor, that doesn't really matter. So you're still going to be polygamous out there, and so that didn't fly. And so then, in the late '80s, the Washington D.C. passed the Enabling Act. An Enabling Act for Utah. An Enabling Act means here are the rules that you have to follow if you want to become a state. And so the number one big rule was, hey, Utah, you have to outlaw polygamy. And so in 1890, enough Utes, people of Utah, the Mormons, I've done this already. They passed the law that said, all right, no more polygamy in Utah, 1890. And they passed the law. And then in 1896, President Grover Cleveland signs the bill, and Utah becomes a state. Wow. I wish I had colorful stories for South Dakota, North Dakota, and Idaho, and Washington, and all that, but they're not as exciting. Okay. I know you really want to ask the question, right? You want to ask the question. Well, my answer is, yes, there are still some sects, some factions of the Mormon Church that, we're going to move on. Hey, the third random fact up here on this slide, April 22nd, 1889. If you grew up as a kid in Oklahoma, then on that day, at lunch, they gave you a flag, or they gave somebody in your class a flag, and they put everybody out on the playground, and the PE coach blew his whistle, or maybe he even had a starter pistol, and he bang, and then all the kids ran out on the playground, and they put their flags down on the ground, and they claimed the territory of the playground. And everybody who's not from Oklahoma is like, why would you do that? Right, because we're celebrating Land Run Day. So Land Run Day, which is like a real thing, in April 22nd of 1889, a whole bunch of people came out here to unclaimed territory in Oklahoma, in Oklahoma territory, and they had a land run. And so literally, we had people line up on a line, and at noon, the gun went off, and there's the famous picture. And there's actually several pictures, but that's probably the most famous one. And there's the gun, and you got the guys, the guys on the horses, and they're taking off, and they got their flags, and they're going to go out there, and they're going to stake claim into Oklahoma. I know, and again, all of you people who are not from Oklahoma who are watching this, there might be like 3 of you, you're like, really? That's how Oklahoma was organized? So, Boomer Sooner, right? Before the land run was announced, was taking place in the 1870s and the early 1880s, we had groups of whites who came into Indian Territory and were claiming lands that did not belong to them. They were led by several groups, but David Payne was the biggest of these group leaders. And so the whites would come in, they would claim land, and then the Indian police would say, no, get out, and then they'd leave, and then they'd come back the next day, and get out. And so we called those people the boomers, because they were trying to, get boom towns. I don't know how that works, but the boomers. Okay, but then on April 22nd, the night of April 21st, or maybe even a couple months before that, but the night of April 21st, it was a dark night, and so some people crossed the line early under cover of darkness, and they went out and they staked their claim. I was about to say stuck their claim. They staked their claim to some really nice, choice parts of Oklahoma in this area, and then when the gun went off and everybody ran across, and they're like, "Hey, how'd you guys get here so fast?" And they're like, "Oh, we just have fast horses." No, they didn't. They were sooner than everybody else. Get it right? The Sooners, Boomer Sooner. Okay. See, Utah and Oklahoma on one slide. Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota. You stink. You got no good stories. I'd say that. I don't know what to do. Holds my hand. This will go faster. Okay. Now that all the land was claimed, I mean, literally, all the land is claimed from East Coast to the West Coast. It's all taken. We no longer have a frontier because it's all taken, right? Frederick Jackson Turner excuse me, Frederick Jackson Turner said, quote, "American history has been in a large degree the history of the colonization of the Great West." If we go back 18 videos ago, we were talking about the proclamation line of 1763, yeah? And saying, hey, you're not allowed to cross this line because on this side are the French and the Indians, and we can't protect you. And we had the Americans like, you can't tell us to not cross that line. And then we had the War for Independence. So we've always wanted to move west. And then we got all the way out here to the west, and now where do we go? What's our next frontier? What is the next frontier? I mean, we know what the final frontier is. Well, I guess it kind of depends. It's various beliefs. From the late 18th century, again talking about like 1763, right? It's called the safety valve theory. Man, you're over there in Boston, and you lose your job, and you lose your kids, and I don't know how that works, and you lose your income, and your house falls apart. You know what? Just start over. Just put everything you have in a backpack and head west. Just start walking. It was called the safety valve theory, that people always had a plan B. I mean, some of them they're not going to want to take it, but there's always in the back of their mind, well, I can always just go out to the west. Well, now that the west is all, I don't want to say settled, but the west is all claimed, well, what are you going to do? We did have some large tracts of land that the U.S. government said, ooh, you know what, if we give away everything, then we're not going to have anything. So the United States government did claim large tracts of land for, like military bases, Area 51, things like that. But then national parks, Yellowstone being the first one. I have a date up there, yeah, 1872, Old Faithful. And then Yosemite in 1890. And on and on and on and on. All right. Moving on, agricultural and industrialization. Your farmers were going to make some money. Why are you going to make some money? Because we're going to start having these inventions, these steam engines, these combines that can thresh and reap at the same time. Problem is, don't buy too big of a combine. You buy too big of a combine, and you go into debt. And farmers are not good at getting out of debt at this time. I don't know if there's. I don't know. The soil in the West, though, if you're talking about western Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, the middle of the country, our soil it's pretty dry. I mean, you think about that, right? I mean, you've gone out there, and I mean, it's pretty dry. So the crops that grew very well in the East, the tobaccos and things like that, they're not going to do very well out here because it's just the soil's too dry, and we just have too much sun out here. So, and not enough water. So what do? Well, a couple of things. You learn how to irrigate. You learn how to irrigate, and so you suck up all the water from the Colorado River and other rivers, or you bring in more hearty stock. So like the Russian wheat that came over here, and it doesn't need as much moisture, and so it grows pretty well out here in the Great West. And there you go. Hey, you can't find what you're looking for at the general store? So Montgomery Ward's an entrepreneur. He came up with a way to have a really, really large general store that had everything. I mean, you could like buy a house. And it came in pieces. You'd have to put it together. But you could buy a house from Montgomery Ward. And so he had a catalog that you could you could get and look through the catalog and order stuff through the mail. I'm sitting there thinking, when I was growing up in the 70s as a kid, I remember catalogs like that. I mean, technically, I guess we still have catalogs. You get like Sharper Image and other catalogs in the mail, around Christmas time. But they're not very. I mean, the Montgomery Ward's catalogs and the TG&Y catalogs. You guys don't even know. I mean, they were like really thick. Moving on. Hey, if you grow a lot of crops, you get a lot of food out there. You have so much food, you're going to go sell it to everybody else. If there's more product out there, that means that the price is going to go down, right? Cause and effect, supply, demand. And so you put more food out there, the price goes down. Well, if the price goes down, then the farmers aren't making as much money. So how do the farmers fix that? Well, they can fix that two different ways. Either they can reel it back in and not put as much food out there on the table and the price goes up, or they can just put more food out there on the table and that way they get the lesser price, but they have more food, so it makes up for the difference. Oh, the problem is if you put even more food, the price continues to go down. How do you solve that problem? That we have too much food and the farmers are making way too much food. How do you solve that problem? Anybody have an idea? Anybody have an idea? You know, we're going to have a president in the 1920s, late 20s and early 30s that's going to come up with a really interesting idea of getting people to farm dirt, but we'll get to that later. Not to say everything was perfect out here in the Midwest. Droughts, prairie fires, floods, locusts, boll weevils. Hey, there's a picture of a boll weevil. He's cute. High tax, they go after the cotton crops, right? High taxes. Interesting point here. Farmers cannot hide their money. I mean, when a farmer makes a lot of money, what do they invest in? They invest in more equipment. They buy more land. That's what farmers do. And so when a tax collector comes out and goes, okay, you are X amount rich. I know you're this rich because I see everything that you own right here. Compared to the people on the East Coast who the tax collector walks into their house and they're like, okay, how rich are you? You know, how much taxes do you owe us? And the rich person's like, oh no, we're so poor, we can barely afford, you know, the SpaghettiOs in the cupboard. And meanwhile, in the basement or across the harbor, there's a secret bank that has the really good SpaghettiOs, or maybe even the Vienna sausages over there. And so it's a lot easier to hide your wealth in the East Coast than it is the farmers. So the farmers kind of got played on that because they had to pay the full amount of taxes. So the farmers getting played. Here we go. A short story. Farmers and railroads, not so much. I mean, the farmers had to use the railroads to get their crops from point A to point B, New York City, right? Or other places on the East Coast. They had to use the railroads. The railroads knew that they had the farmers over a barrel, so the railroads decided to charge the farmers whatever the farmers could not afford. They kept jacking up the prices, and the farmers complained about this. But you know, if you have one little farmer and he's going up against, you know, the giant railroads, what is he going to do? If he complains too much, there were stories that say that the railroad people would just take the farmers' crops and just dump them on the side of the railroad and just be like, what are you going to do? And they just drive off. Well, train off, choo-choo off. What am I looking for? Railroad off. They would just go off and, what's the verb? Just go off in the sunset. No, they would drive, not drive off. They would engine off. I'll come back to that. I know you're shouting at me in the camera. You know what the verb is. Like in a car, you're like, oh, I'm going to go drive off. In a train, you. Okay. So what does a farmer do? One single individual farmer, they can't do anything, and so you have. Those of you who've had me in class, you know this is going to bother me for the next 3 or 4 minutes. So one farmer talks to another farmer, and the other farmer's like, hey, you know what? I agree too. I think this is bad. The railroads are evil people. And those two farmers, they get their two buddies. Now you have 4 farmers who are complaining, and the railroads go, oh, we still don't care. There's only 4 of you. But then those 4 farmers double, and there's 8 of them, and 16 of them, and 32 of them. I wonder how far I go. And 64 of them, and 28 of them, and 512. Sorry, 256 of them, 512 of them, and 1,048. It doesn't matter. The point is that 1,024. I said 1,048. 2,048. 4,096. Stop. And eventually you get enough of them, 800,000 of them, and you get a group that's able to complain to the railroads. Now the railroads, they're still not going to care. So let's see. Form a farmer union. Why are farmers not big in forming unions? Well, a couple reasons. Farmers are generally independent people. You think about, hey, I'm going to go farm. I mean, they're out there on the big acreage, kind of by themselves. They're kind of loners or individualists. And then, 2, how do you get farmers together? I mean, in the cities, you're like, hey, we're all going to go meet at 7-Eleven. The farmers, hey, we're all going to go meet where? Right? No, where are you going to go meet? So 800,000 of them got together and formed the Grange. The Grange, known as the National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry. Note, that's not what you think it means. The Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry. You know what? I'm going to have you look that up. Husbandry. I'm going to have you look that up. Was a social club for farmers, 800,000 strong, and they're going to form co-ops. And so a co-op is when, again, you have enough of them get together, and they're going to make cooperative decisions about what railroads to use and what grain elevators to use, and that way prices come down when everybody makes choices like that. They passed several Granger laws against the railroads that said, we are not going to pay these particular prices for the Grange in Wyoming did not want to pay the same prices as the Grange in, or the farmers in Montana, who didn't want to pay the same prices in South Dakota. And so they passed these Granger laws. And then the Grange bad news. Supreme Court of the United States ruled in Wabash versus Illinois in 1886 that the individual states could not control the prices of railroad tickets and or railroad fares because the trains cross state lines, and therefore that falls under the Interstate Commerce Clause. And so individual states and or Grange communities cannot determine prices for the railroads. Hey, next year in AP Government, we're going to be talking about Wabash. There's a lot more crazy stuff than that, but this is the short version. Another version of the Grange, we have the National Farmers Party in 1877, and they're going to eventually form the Populist Party, the backbone of the Populist Party. So the National Farmers Union, a million farmers out there, which we look back on it and we say, you had 1 million of them. There could have been a lot more of you, but you are being racist and you're not allowing the blacks to join your group. That's okay. The African Americans are going to form the National Colored Farmers Alliance in 1886. So, to the National Farmers Alliance, and so. They're going to try again to get the farmers' voice to Washington D.C. So we have we're going to form the Populist Party, and so we have a couple of cartoons over here. The Populist Party over here. The Populist Party, what their platform, the ideas that they believe in, very varied. They're very varied, and so here's kind of a list. And so here we have the political cartoon of the hot air balloon, and it's a patchwork of different beliefs from the Populist Party, trying to get them off the ground. And then you got the Populist Party snake swallowing the Democratic donkey. Where did the donkey come from, Andrew Jackson fans? That's right. Political planks of the Populist Party platform. Ooh, man, check out that alliteration. That was unintended too. Collective bargaining. Federal regulation of railroad rates, telegraphs, and telephones. Expansionary monetary policy, bimetallism, we'll talk about in a little bit. The unlimited coinage of silver, a graduated income tax. So graduated income tax is, the idea is that if you make $10, then let's say the tax on $10 is $3. And so then if you make $20, then you say to yourself, well, if 3 is for 10, then 6 should be for 20. But no, graduated income tax says it's going to be $7 instead of $6 on the 20. So the more you make, the more percentage that you pay in taxes. So if you make $100, then maybe it's like 60% or whatever it is. And here we are in the year 2021, and we actually have that type of tax system in the United States of America. So the more you make, yes, the more you pay in taxes, but it's actually a higher percentage of your income than it would be if you make less. So some of you are sitting here thinking, wait, so if I make less money, I pay less taxes percentage-wise also? Well, yes, but you're making less money. Direct election of senators. Oh, we do that today. See, they got that one passed. A shorter work week. You're like, yeah, shorter work week. Yeah, but from 6 to 5 and from 80 hours a week to 60 hours a week, or 60 hours a week to 50 hours a week, 50 hours a week to 40 hours a week, and establishment of a postal savings system. All right. In 1893, we had a panic. I know this shocks you, right? The United States, we go into a panic. We had speculation, investors, and banks are calling in loans. I know this shocked you. So in 1893, the panic. And so a lot of people become unemployed. And so we have a gentleman, his name is Jacob Coxey. He's an Ohio businessman. He's going to get together about 400 guys, I think it's 400, about 400 guys, and they're going to march on Washington. And this is important because this is the first time anybody's ever done this, organized a march on the Capitol. They're gonna march into they're gonna call themselves the Army of the Commonwealth of Christ, and everybody just calls them Coxey's Army, but the Army of the Commonwealth of Christ. And they're going to march up to Washington, D.C., and ultimately there are other groups that are going to join him. There's going to be about 6,000 guys who show up in Washington, D.C. the 1st of April of 1894. And so Coxey and his leadership team go up to the Capitol and knock on the doors, and they're like, hey, here's what we want. All these people out here, they are unemployed, and this is what we're going to ask for. We would like you, federal government, to come up with, we want you to pay us to build roads, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build whatever you need us to build. We will do this for you. Just give us jobs. We will do stuff for you. Hey, that's not a bad idea. Did you read the next line? Coxey and his leadership team, they got arrested. Why? Because they were walking on the grass. They got arrested for walking on the grass. Not that they were brandishing weapons and storming into the Capitol. Because, of course, I just say that because, and this is just for posterity's sake, last week, before we filmed this film right here, this is when we had all those people storm the Capitol. This week we have President-elect Biden becoming president of the United States, and so last week we had the crazy people in D.C. Leaders were arrested for walking on the grass. All right, and so why is this important? It's the first march of Washington into Washington D.C. All right. Excuse me. The Pullman strike. Mr. Pullman is going to, he's a big railroad car maker, railroad cars maker. The car drives off, the railroad choo-choos, I'm going to make a decision. The railroad choo-choos off. So Pullman, he decides, this is in Chicago, he's going to make his own little utopian town. Remember utopians? Going to make an own little utopian town just south of Chicago called the Pullman Group. And so all of his workers are going to live in this town. And he's going to be in charge of everything. He's going to be in charge of their rent. He's going to be in charge of where they of their entertainment. He's going to be in charge of everything. And the people who are going to work there, live there, are making pretty good money. And so they don't have a problem following all the rules. He's kind of like the boss of Pullman Town, Mr. Pullman. And everything's going great and everything's going wonderful. And then Pullman starts to cut people out. And then he starts to lower wages. He starts to lower wages. The problem with lowering wages is that he doesn't lower the rent of the houses that he's renting to his workers. And so he's taking money out of their wallets, but he's not lowering the rent. Here we have the very famous political cartoon of Mr. Pullman, and he's squeezing the worker. He's bringing down the person's wages, but the rent stays the same. And so the poor worker is getting trapped. So a whole bunch of people are going to complain about this, and he's like, suck it up, you have to deal with it because he's the boss and there's nothing you can do about it. And then we have Eugene V. Debs. Not the first time this is the first time we're talking about him, not the last. Eugene V. Debs is going to come in and he's going to say, hey, I'm a member of the American Railroad Union and we would love for you guys to sign up. And if you all come into the union, we will be able to then unionize against this evil, awful Pullman character. As a whole bunch of the Pullman workers jumped on board of the ARU, and then the ARU called for a strike. And so all the workers laid down their work tools, and there you go. And that would have been okay, but then some of them got violent, and they started tearing apart stuff, and we got 30 people killed, and $80 million in damage, and it was bad. And it was bad. Basically, everything west of Detroit, Michigan, the railroad stopped working because the strike was everywhere. I mean, it was everywhere. So bad news, bad news. Like I said, 30 people died in this. Eventually, now this is, railroad company is a private company, right? And so the government kind of let them handle it. But eventually, the people complained enough and said, government, you need to step in here and do something about this because we got people dying and $80 million worth of damage. And so the president, Cleveland is going to go, okay, all right. How can I send in the army? How can I send in the army? What justification can I use to send in the army? I know the railroad carries the mail, the postal mail, and the workers who are stopping the trains are stopping the mail. And that's a no-no. You can't interfere with U.S. mail. And so the president sends, his attorney general sends in the U.S. Army to keep the mail going, and the strike was over. Just a couple more slides here, and we'll be done. William McKinley, William Jennings Bryan. They're going to run for president here in 1896. William McKinley is going to push for the gold standard, that everything should be based off gold. And William Jennings Bryan says, no, 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 we should have silver as well. All the gold people said, no, silver's cheap. It's not like a real metal. I mean, it's a real metal, but it's so cheap and nobody's going to use it ever. And so if we allow silver to be used to pay for debts, then the whole country's going to fall apart. And William Jennings Bryan and his populist group said, no, that's not how that works. We need to have two different flavors of metal, gold and silver. Yeah, I said flavors. I mean, have you ever licked gold? No. Choo away. I feel like choo-chooing away right now. These two, they argued the gold standard. All right, and so then the Populist Party jumped on the Democrats' coattails. William Jennings Bryan was a Democrat ultimately. He was very young. He was 36 years old. He was known for going around and speaking, and sometimes he'd do speeches, like 30 speeches a day. Man, that wear my vocal cords out. Let's see. Ultimately, McKinley's election machine. McKinley, the Republican, he's going to put out this advertisement, this rumor that if you vote for William Jennings Bryan, you're not going to have a job tomorrow. And so it turns out a whole bunch of people believed him, and William Jennings Bryan lost. Although you look at the map, blue is Democrat, red is Republican, and you think, well, if you do go by size, the Democrats clearly, but you know how that works, electoral college, right? Oh, Arizona Territory did not get to vote, New Mexico Territory didn't get to vote, and Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory did not get to vote. Don't worry, they're going to get to vote. Well, no, I guess not in the next one either, but okay. Last slide, the last slide. So William McKinley, he's not going to be president for very long. We'll get to that later, next video. William McKinley becomes president, and everybody basically calms down with regard to the Panic of 1893. Everybody calms down because now the gold standard is now. I was about to say the gold standard is now the gold standard, and there's an announcement that's made that says if you have cash money, paper money, and you want to go to the bank and you want to turn it in and get gold, you absolutely are allowed to do that. And so some people did that, but then other people are like, well, just because you told me that my cash money, I can go get gold, just knowing that I can do that, I don't have to do it anymore because, now that I know I can do it. And so there wasn't a run on gold like the Democrats thought there was going to be. And so it all worked out, and they all lived happily ever after. Wait, so then you have the tariff is going to be raised. Oh, poor farmers. The tariff, we call this one the Dingley tariff bill, is going to be raised to 46.5%. Ooh, that's pretty high. And then we have, on top of all of that, you've got another gold rush. So this is like, what, our 4th or 5th or 12th gold rush. This is one of the last gold rushes that we're going to have. I mean, we had obviously the big one, the 49ers in California. Then we had the one in Colorado. We had the one in Georgia. We had the one with the Cherokees. We had the one in the Black Hills in South Dakota. And now we have the last big one here in the Klondike. And so, what would you do to go to the Klondike? And so it says here in 1896, gold was discovered, and it says 100,000 people decided, you know what, we're going to the Klondike and going to go get our gold. And only about a third of them made it. And you say to yourself, wow, like 500,000 people went to California. Why did only 100,000, really only about 30,000 who made it to Klondike? Why is, well, there's a reason, because that's not easy doing that, trying to get to the Klondike. I mean, you couldn't get in an airplane. There are no trains that went to the Klondike, chewing down the track. And I mean, you got this guy down here at the very bottom. I can't decide, is it a bookshelf? I mean, is he carrying a bookshelf? I mean, when you got to read, you got to read. I'm trying to think, is that a refrigerator? No, I don't know. I don't know what he's carrying, but he's carrying that bad boy all the way up the mountain. All right, here's the very last thing. The guy in the lower right corner. You recognize him? For a piece of candy next year when you come back, the first one to tell me on email or through Canvas this guy's name. Get a good look at him. What is his name? All right, here's your hint. Now, it actually isn't that person's name, but that's the hint that will get you that guy's name. All right. I know you were like, wow, he did that on the first try. He must have practiced. No, I'm just that talented. No, I really did practice. All right. I'll see y'all guys on the flip side. Be good this week. Be good this week.